Hi guys, an ex-Tory MP was invited onto NewsNight to talk about the protest taking place in Ebbing outside an ex-hotel, a hotel that was closed and then later reopened to house asylum seekers. Now, of course, the Conservatives will not take responsibility for their actions and instead focus on, well, you need to stop the boats. Have a listen to this.
Well, look, I think an allegation of a sexual offence against a child is always going to be an emotive, sort of explosive thing to happen, and probably what's happening now in Epping means that hotel's future as asylum accommodation is no longer tenable. But actually, I can't answer the second part of your question, because with the increase in numbers, and they are really high this summer, I think they're the highest ever, there simply isn't a sensible alternative. We can start talking about army barracks, and they have lots of inadequacies too and don't really provide the answers. The answer is absolutely to get control of what's happening across the Channel. And as I say, speaking on behalf of, I think, the people that you met on the high street today, this isn't a general antipathy, I don't think, towards refugees. And as I've given one example already.
I definitely did not get that impression at all today.
It's about this profound concern that is taking root all over the country about undocumented men. And just to come back, Nick, on one of your points, I know what the government have said. Actually, I'm glad they've said it about refusing to grant asylum to a convicted sex offender, but there are other ways of the remaining in the United Kingdom under the Modern Slavery Act, under invoking certain sections of the Human Rights Act. You can avoid deportation. So the point is the government cannot guarantee removal, and that is something I think people fundamentally want to see.
So the Tory response is we need to control the border, we need to look at what's happening across the English Channel. These people are responsible for the rising backlog of asylum claims. They refused to process claims. Robert Jenrick, when he was the immigration minister, even said, that, well, it will create a pull factor if we process claims. So they refused to process claims. And what happened? A backlog filled up and hotels and other accommodation went to breaking point. Now, the Labour government is trying to deal with this by closing hotels, but if numbers keep coming in, they have to be housed somewhere. And when it comes to protests like this, all you're going to do is see this hotel closed and the asylum seekers moved somewhere else, because they're not going to disappear. The solution, of course, is to process the claims, to inject as much resources as possible into the Home Office to process these claims, to bring the numbers down, to bring down the backlog, get people who have a right to stay into refugee status and eventually working and living in normal accommodation, and those who have no right to stay deported, removed. But Tories decided, no, we're not going to focus on processing claims, we're going to focus on decorations, on shiny things like stopping the boats. How many times did the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, talk about stopping the boats? Press conferences about stopping the boats. They were not actually interested, and I said it at the time, in stopping the boats. If they did, they would have opened safe routes. This would have stopped the boats. And the people who are in the country already, you would have processed the claims. But they took an active decision not to do that. Now they're talking about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. This is not going to sort out the problem. The only way is to create a safe route to stop the boats, and you need to process the claims. That takes time. Now, people are going to be housed in temporary accommodation while that is done. I think perhaps there can be greater cooperation with local communities to ask if asylum seekers can be moved in there. There's going to be pushback. The government will have to come up with viable solutions, but forcing people into communities where the communities don't agree or they don't know about this is going to only help Nigel Farage and the far right, because they will say, look, these criminals are coming in, these people have no right to be in the country, they're intimidating members of the public, they're making people feel afraid, and the strongest argument that the right wing will use is your community is being destroyed by these asylum seekers, that the demographics are changing or stuff like this. And this is, unfortunately, a very powerful argument. It's one that resonates with a lot of people. So the government have to be aware of this. But they're facing a massive problem. The Tories left an absolute disaster when it came to the asylum system in total. So closing hotels is, of course, the best way forward, but people have to be housed somewhere. And more people are coming in. as a direct result of Brexit as well, which the Conservatives refuse to talk about. Not sure why this Tory MP is on. What value does she add to the conversation? It would have been better to have not an ex-MP, but one who's sitting in a position of power, or at least within the party, because they would be able to answer some of these questions maybe. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.